I was 63 years old, the night I placed the camera inside my jewelry box, and I remember thinking this is either the smartest thing I've ever done or the saddest. Maybe both. Let me tell you how I got there. My name is Eleanor. I spent 31 years teaching 7th grade English in a small town in Ohio. I graded papers at the kitchen table every night, while my husband, Gerald, watched the evening news in the living room. We had a good life. Not a glamorous one, but a real one, the kind built out of consistency and quiet love and knowing exactly where everything belonged. Gerald passed away 2.5 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I didn't have time to prepare, which I suppose is the cruelest part of that particular disease. One Tuesday, he was complaining about back pain, and by Thanksgiving he was gone. After that, the house, our house, the one we'd lived in for 27 years, felt less like a home and more like a museum. Every room held something I wasn't ready to look at. His coffee mug still on the second shelf, his reading glasses on the nightstand, his handwriting on the grocery list, still stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet we'd bought in Savannah in 2009. My son, Thomas, suggested I sell the house and move in with him and his wife, Linda. He said it made practical sense. The house was too big for one person. The property taxes had gone up again, and he worried about me being alone. He was genuinely concerned, I believe that. Thomas has always been a good son, attentive and kind in the ways his father taught him to be. What Thomas did not fully understand, or perhaps chose not to see, was that his wife did not share his enthusiasm for the arrangement. I noticed it the first weekend I visited to look at the room they were offering me. Linda showed me around with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She talked about the guest room as though she were a real estate agent, presenting a listing, highlighting the closet space, the natural light, the proximity to the bathroom, all while standing slightly in front of the doorway, as though she hadn't fully decided to let me in yet. "It'll be great," she said, in that particular tone people use when they mean the opposite. I almost said no. I want you to know that. I was this close to calling Thomas and telling him I'd found a small apartment near the school where I used to work, that I'd be fine, that I appreciated the offer but didn't want to impose. That was my instinct. But then Thomas called me on a Sunday evening, and I could hear something careful in his voice, the way you hold a word before you say it, and he told me that the property taxes on the Ohio house had gone up significantly, that my pension and Gerald's small life insurance wouldn't cover both that and my regular expenses indefinitely, and that he really, truly wanted me nearby. He said, "Mom, I want to take care of you the way you took care of me." What was I supposed to say to that? So, I sold the house. I donated a great deal, stored a few pieces of furniture, and moved into the guest room in my son's home in Charlotte, North Carolina, at 63 years old, carrying 63 years of a life into a 12 by 14 room. I told myself it would be an adjustment. I told myself Linda and I simply needed time. What I did not tell myself, because I wasn't ready to say it out loud, was that Linda had already decided who I was before I even arrived. She had decided I was an intrusion. The signs were small at first, the way the most important things always are. She would rearrange items I'd placed in the bathroom cabinet without mentioning it. She'd make dinner for two, and then remember at the last moment, with theatrical surprise, that she'd forgotten I'd be joining them. She made comments about the temperature I kept the thermostat at, about the television programs I watched in the common room in the early evening before they came home from work, about the way I folded the dish towels apparently incorrectly and left them on the counter, rather than hanging them through the oven handle the way she preferred. None of these things were enormous. That's the thing about this kind of treatment, it's designed to be deniable. Every individual incident is something you could be accused of overreacting to. It's the accumulation that wears you down. I kept to myself as much as I could. I ate breakfast early, before either of them were awake. I tidied up after myself with a thoroughness I hadn't practiced since I had student teachers observing my classroom. I tried to be invisible, which, at 63, after a lifetime of being fully present in the world, felt like a particular kind of grief. Thomas noticed some of it. I could tell by the way he occasionally glanced between Linda and me at dinner, reading the air the way you read a room when you walk in and sense you've interrupted something. But he didn't say anything. I understood. He loved us both, and he was trying to hold two things together that weren't naturally compatible, and that is exhausting work. Then things shifted. About 4 months after I moved in, I noticed that small things in my room were not quite where I'd left them. A tube of hand cream moved to the wrong side of my dresser. The book I was reading sat down with the spine facing the opposite direction. Nothing conclusive. Nothing I could point to and say definitively, someone was in here, but I am 63 years old. I was a teacher for 31 years. I have spent a lifetime paying attention to details, because details are where the truth lives. I knew. I started paying closer attention. One afternoon, I came home earlier than expected. I'd been at a doctor's appointment that ended ahead of schedule. I parked in the driveway and came in through the back door, quietly, not intentionally, just out of habit. Linda's car was in the garage. She worked from home 3 days a week. I assumed she was in her office on the second floor. As I came down the hallway toward my room, I heard a sound that stopped me cold. It was the distinctive slide and catch of my closet door. I stood in the hallway for a moment, just outside my room. I heard the soft shifting of fabric, the quiet movement of something being carefully replaced. Then silence. I waited 10 seconds. Then I knocked on my own doorframe. Linda. There was a pause, just a breath too long before she appeared in the doorway of my room. She was holding nothing. Her expression was composed, but her left hand was pressed flat against her thigh in the way people press down on something they want to control. Eleanor, she said. I didn't hear you come in. I was just checking if you needed more hangers. I noticed the closet looked a little crowded. She smiled. I looked at her for a moment. Then I smiled back. That's so thoughtful, I said. Thank you, Linda. She left. I closed my door, sat down on the edge of my bed, and stayed very still for a long time. Let me tell you what Linda didn't know about me. She saw an old woman in a guest room. She saw someone who had been reduced by circumstance, someone who had given up the home she'd lived in for 3 decades, someone who ate breakfast alone at 5:45 in the morning to avoid taking up space. She saw someone she could dismiss. She did not see the woman who once caught 3 students cheating on the same exam using 3 different methods and documented every piece of evidence before approaching a single one of them. She did not see the woman who had managed a classroom of 32 12-year-olds for 31 years and could read a lie across a room before the liar had finished telling it. She did not see someone who had been paying attention. Here is what I had noticed in the 4 months I'd been living in that house. Linda had a particular interest in the carved wooden box I kept on the top shelf of my closet. I'd brought it from Ohio. It had been my mother's, and before that, her mother's a dark walnut box with a brass clasp, small enough to hold in 2 hands. Gerald used to joke that it was the most important box in any room it occupied because of how carefully I handled it. Linda had asked about it twice, in the indirect way she had of wanting things not directly, but circling. The first time, she'd commented on it when helping me carry boxes in on move-in day, saying it looked antique, asking if it was valuable. The second time, she'd mentioned to Thomas within my hearing that some of Eleanor's old things might be worth something at an estate sale, a comment that had landed with the specific weight of something not accidentally said. What Linda had decided, I believe, was that the box contained jewelry. Valuable jewelry. She wasn't entirely wrong. I did have some pieces of my mother's that had modest, sentimental, and material value, but she had constructed an entire theory in her head about what was in that box, and the theory had been eating at her for months. I understood this. I am a woman who spent 31 years teaching stories. I know how a character's obsession works. I know how it builds, and I know what it drives a person to do. So I made a decision. I went to an electronics store on a Tuesday afternoon. I am not a person who considers herself particularly comfortable with technology. I still prefer physical books, and I write letters by hand, but I am also not a person who lets discomfort stop her. I asked a young man named Derek for help, explained what I needed in general terms, and he showed me a small device no larger than a button that could record several hours of video, and was simple enough to operate that even I could manage it. I placed it inside the wooden box, nestled between two pieces of folded velvet, angled toward the closet door. I tested it twice. Then I arranged the box precisely as it had always been, went to my early breakfast the next morning, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. 4 days later, on a Thursday, I left the house at 8:15 for what I'd mentioned within Linda's hearing the night before, was a dentist appointment that would take most of the morning. I drove to a coffee shop 3 miles away. I ordered a tea. I sat by the window and read for 2 hours. Then I drove home. I did not go inside immediately. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes, just breathing. Because here is the thing about setting a trap. Even when you are certain, even when every instinct you have has been pointing in one direction for months, there is still a part of you that hopes you're wrong. That hopes the person you are living with, the woman married to your son, is not the person you've been forced to conclude she is. I was not wrong. When I opened the camera file that evening, quietly, in my room, with my door closed, I watched 14 minutes of footage that made my chest tight in a way that had nothing to do with my heart condition and everything to do with being a mother. Linda came into my room at 8:47 in the morning. She moved quickly, and without hesitation, the way you move when you've rehearsed something. She went straight to the closet, reached to the top shelf, and took down the wooden box. She carried it to my bed and sat down. She examined the clasp for a moment, then opened it. I watched her face change. She moved the velvet pieces aside. She looked at what was in the box: some earrings, a thin gold bracelet that had been my mother's, a folded piece of paper on which I had written, in my best teacher's handwriting, "I see you, Linda. The camera sees you too." She picked up the paper and read it, and then she sat there for a long moment, holding that piece of paper, and the expression on her face was not anger. It was something I recognized from 31 years of teaching. From the moment a child realizes they have been caught not just in the act but in the lie they told themselves about who they were. It was the expression of someone meeting themselves clearly for the first time. She put the paper down. She replaced the velvet. She set the box back on the shelf. She left my room and closed the door behind her, and on the footage I could see, very clearly, the way her hands were shaking. I had the video, but I also had something else. In the weeks before this, I had been paying attention to other things too. I had not been looking for them. Let me be clear about that. But when you are a quiet person living in a house where you are largely ignored, you become a witness to more than anyone intends. I had seen, on 3 separate occasions, a car parked at the end of the block for longer than made sense, the same silver sedan, always on the days Thomas traveled for work. I had seen Linda step outside to take a phone call and turn away from the house in the particular way people turn when they don't want to be overheard inside. I had seen a name appear on her phone screen when it lit up on the kitchen counter, not Thomas's contact name, but a first name I didn't recognize, appearing often enough that it registered. I am not a vindictive person. I want to be clear about that too. I did not go looking for this information to use as a weapon, but I am also a person who believes that the truth, once visible, cannot be responsibly ignored, especially when it concerns my son. I thought about it for 3 days. I sat with it the way I used to sit, with a difficult student situation, turning it over, examining it from every angle, asking myself what the right thing was, not the satisfying thing, not the easy thing, the right thing. On Sunday evening, I asked Thomas if he had a few minutes to talk. We sat in the kitchen. I had made tea. I placed my phone on the table between us and I said, "I need you to watch something, and I need you to let me finish explaining before you say anything." I watched my son watch the video. I have taught children for 31 years. I have watched faces move through complicated emotions in real time, more times than I can count. Watching Thomas was one of the hardest things I have ever done. When the video ended, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "How long have you known?" I said, "I had a feeling for a while. I only had proof for a few days." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "Is there anything else?" I told him about the car. I told him about the phone calls. I told him about the name on the screen. I didn't editorialize. I didn't make it dramatic. I simply told him what I had seen, in the same way I used to present evidence to a student, calmly and completely, and let the weight of it rest where it belonged. Thomas didn't cry in front of me. He thanked me, which was such a Thomas thing to do, so careful and controlled. And he said he needed some time to think, and he got up and went upstairs. Linda came home 40 minutes later. I was still in the kitchen. I heard her car in the driveway, heard her footsteps on the front walk, heard the door open. She came into the kitchen and stopped when she saw me sitting there. Something moved across her face, something quick and hard to name. "Thomas is upstairs," I said. "I think he wants to talk to you." She looked at me for a long moment, and I looked back at her, quietly and without flinching, the way I had looked at 31 years of students who needed to understand that I saw them completely. She went upstairs. I finished my tea. What happened between Thomas and Linda that evening is their story, not mine to tell in detail. I will say that there were raised voices at first, and then silence, and then lower voices for a very long time, and then silence again. Thomas came downstairs at close to midnight. He looked like a man who had put down something very heavy. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. "She's going to stay with her sister for a while," he said. I nodded. "Mom," he said, and then stopped. He looked at the table for a moment. "I'm sorry. I should have seen it. I should have paid more attention." I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. "You loved her," I said. "That's not something to apologize for." He looked up at me. "You could have just left," he said. "When it started being difficult here, you could have found an apartment. You didn't have to stay." I thought about that for a moment, about the mornings I'd eaten alone at 5:45, about the hand cream moved to the wrong side of the dresser, about the way Linda smiled with her mouth but not her eyes, about all the small dignities I had absorbed and let pass. "No," I said finally. "I didn't have to stay." I left it at that. What I didn't say, because Thomas didn't need to hear it, not that night, was that I had stayed because of him. Because I knew what it meant to have a parent in your corner, to have someone in your home who would always, without hesitation, tell you the truth. Gerald had been that for me. I wanted to be that for Thomas. Not by interfering, not by inserting myself where I didn't belong, but by being present, by paying attention, by being, quietly and without fanfare, the kind of person who notices things and tells the truth about what she sees. That is what 63 years teaches you, if you're paying attention. Linda moved her things out over the following week. She never said anything to me directly, not even at the end. The morning she made her last trip with boxes to her car, we passed each other in the hallway, and she looked at me with an expression I've thought about many times since. It wasn't anger. It wasn't quite shame either. It was, I think, the look of someone who had underestimated something and knew it, fully and finally, and couldn't undo it. I said good morning. I went to make my tea. Thomas and I have breakfast together now, most mornings. He gets up earlier than he used to. We sit at the kitchen table, the same table where I told him the truth, the same table where he put down something heavy, and we drink our coffee and our tea, and we talk about ordinary things. His work, my book, the garden I've started in the small patch of yard outside my window. I moved the carved wooden box from the top shelf of my closet to my dresser, where I can see it. My mother's earrings are still inside, and the thin gold bracelet, and a new piece of folded paper, though this one says nothing. It's just a blank page I put there to remind myself that the story is still being written. I am 63 years old. I eat breakfast early, but no longer because I'm trying to disappear. I eat early because I have always been a morning person, because I like the way light comes through the kitchen window before the neighborhood wakes up, because some habits are yours, and no one's disapproval can take them from you. I am a woman who spent 31 years paying attention, and I am not finished yet. If you are sitting somewhere right now in a house that doesn't quite feel like yours, if you are making yourself small in a space that you deserve to stand fully in, if someone in your life has mistaken your patience for weakness or your silence for surrender, hear me when I say this. They have not met all of you yet. Keep paying attention. The truth has a way of coming to the surface, and when it does, it's always better to be the one who already knew. Thank you for being here today. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of something you've lived through, or someone you know, I would love to hear from you in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, please share it with them. I'll see you next time.